And this is the sight unseen 140 high ceiling that I just purchased from York, Pennsylvania. Has surprisingly little rust. The undercarriage looks decently clean. It's obviously been fluid filmed quite a bit over the years to keep it from rusting out. It did start up without a hitch, although allegedly the starter relay is bad. We will be checking that out here in the future. I do have a starter relay with me, and if it works with the starter relay, that's one less problem right out of the gate. Otherwise, it'll likely be an ignition switch replacement in the future. It didn't have any smoke on startup. It didn't hesitate at all to fire up. Allegedly, it also will go into limp mode if it's below 60 degrees outside and you reach 60 miles per hour. So that is one other thing I will be looking into in the coming days. I suspect it's going to be a boost leak, potentially a bad seal on the seam for the turbo resonator. I'm going to go through a basic pre-trip inspection on this thing. You see the left headlight is out. We'll be back in a moment. And I put my relay in. Nothing. That will be the ignition switch. As you see, when it started, there is a check engine light. That we will be checking as soon as we get back to the house. Reach under here, open the hood. I do hear whine from the power steering pump. Must be either leaking or low or something. It is definitely low. I'll have to work on that. Do a cap dance test. Tight there, wow. That is a beautiful cap dance test. Sitting at idle, that is not even moving. See? I have not seen one like that with this mileage before ever. This is in wonderful shape. Wonderful shape. Got a cheap Autocraft battery that'll probably change out for Napa Gold. All the heat shields are here. Make sure that's plugged all in. Everything's plugged. As I said, headlight is out. Power steering does make a little noise. A little mismatch on the tire. Some Firestone Transforces up front. Westlake, I'm guessing that's a little Chinese brand out back. But they're at least matched up to where it is. Another Westlake here, and the front is also a Transforce AT. Unknown vintage. That tire is 5.5 years old, will need replacement soon. There is a little bit of rust at the bottom of the store and from the damage here on this fender. But aside from that, this is a relatively clean undercarriage, especially considering it came from Pennsylvania. The next stop, I always check the transmission connector for the electrics. You see right there? You see there's a little bit of leakage on the transmission pan. Not sure if it's coming from the connector, but I will be performing a transmission service on this next week. This is a manual lock van, apparently. Notice the locks did not go off when it was started, and there is no lock button. Manual windows. It does have a ladder rack that was pulled off for transport just in case. We weren't sure if it was going to fit inside. And it's got some other shelving and a little bit of minor insulation that probably would be pulled out by anybody who would do anything to this van. But that won't be me. I'm going to probably keep it as is and then turn around and sell it. Unless it turns out to be a really, really good unit, and I might make it like a tow rig and change out mine. Aside from that, everything's clean. Here we got the title. Title was signed. He did unfortunately put my information on it, so I will be putting the van into my name temporarily. We do have a stereo. Let's see. It is a Kenwood. I'll be checking that out in a little bit. AC. Rest doesn't do anything. There is no Eberspacher in here. I turn on the compressor. Let's see what happens. Turn on the AC switch. Nothing. So the AC does not work in this van. All in all, though, at the price point, I did buy it cheap enough to where if it turns into just a parts van, I will still be satisfied and I'll still be money ahead. This one only has 238,000 miles on it. That is it. And by evidence, you know, seats always torn up by this mileage. The starter relay is not the problem. It is the ignition switch more than likely. I will double check that before spending any money on one. But as you can see, somebody has done some aftermarket accessory taps in here. And they also run these wires. They touch this one to that one to start the engine. That's going to be the first priority for repair. It does have a broken windshield. I did see that immediately when I got in. I wonder what this wire is. This is always something curious when you see something coming out here with an aftermarket stereo. This may be a... Oh! It's a speaker. This is a Bluetooth capable, and it comes with a charging base here for cell phone holder. I'm going to take this thing for a quick drive. Alright, so here we go on our test drive. I do hear the power steering is low. And I hear an obvious boost leak. I don't know how well that sound comes through, but obvious boost leak. Passenger side mirror is broken. The whole arm swings around, so I'm going to have to source one of those. The radio does work.
I'm Select Board Agent Nancy.
Aside from that, we're going to go take it on back to the shop right now, and I'm going to look and see what this check engine light is. Also of note, I forgot to show on the video that the windshield frame is surprisingly devoid of rust. I don't know what the previous owner did to this van in order to keep it rust-free, but it is a relatively rust-free unit, which is totally surprising. Another thing that's surprising is most of the plastics are still here and intact. There's one grate missing there, the obvious passenger grate, somebody's been putting their foot up there, and then a couple broken over here. And we'll come on back here to our little lair. That's how close the drop-off point was where I had it delivered to. There was no way I was going to put a semi-truck down my street. There's the rust-free unit from Mississippi that's still for sale. If anybody's interested, hit me up. It's currently priced at $10,900. When we come back, I'll have my scan tool on this. Alright, I've hooked up the Mercedes Xentry system, and as we saw before, it was showing 238,854 miles. This corresponds closely with the reading from the ECU at 238,850 miles. Now, run through a quick test. It's not all that quick, but it's running all the control units, right? And it's going to communicate with all the systems, and it's going to slowly run on through, so I'll bring it back when everything shows up. Alright, so most of the time you buy a van from somebody who didn't regularly take it to a dealer, you're going to have a lot of things showing up. You notice the first row is common rail, and it says common rail has a minor fault. Instrument cluster has an informational fault. Immobilizer is good. Airbag has a minor fault. Transmission control informational. ESP, the traction control, has a minor fault. Electronic selector, minor fault and informational fault. And the heating control has a minor fault. CAN bus is checking out good. So, of course, first I'm going to go into the common rail system. And I'm going to check the fault codes and events. Alright, as I was saying, well, the first thing we had was a dead camera battery. So, pre-glow fault, 1482-1. 2134, component R16 glow plug is faulty. So, you got a bad glow plug. Monitoring of temperature sensors is stored. None of these are active because I didn't get enough time up behind the wheel for it to show any active codes, but we should get some clues here. Start attempt without starter actuation. Well, that would be that bad ignition switch. That is most likely the cause. Engine control unit run-on is faulty. 1610-002. That's a CDR motor electronics relay. It switches off too soon, so I'll have to look into the diagram and find that one. Signal from component 101, mass airflow sensor faulty. On-off ratio of reference signal is outside permitted range. So I'm going to look into the math, and also another one for signal from mass airflow sensor is faulty. But the first thing I'm going to do is erase everything. We have a record of what we have. So we switch off ignition, wait for the CDI to reset itself, switch on. So the next thing we'll go, I want to look at the actual values real fast. Do a quick sensor overview. So I can see the atmospheric pressure. It says 13.879 psi, right? That there is actually taken from the computer. Your boost pressure, or your intake pressure, excuse me, that's your intake pressure sensor. And then your boost pressure is your map sensor at the other side of the charge air system. Right now you see 13.87, 13.8, 13.79, as long as they're all within a certain amount, but of course, you know, if it's at idling, it wants to see a higher number. Boost pressure is an error. Well, if I just touch these and start, I think I took too long. Let me go back and hit that again. Yep, that was it. The fuel pump had turned off. So when I turn it on, we see what we get here. I have to back up. It's not giving me a live stream. Never mind, it stopped working. We'll be back. Alright, we rebooted and we're back. I should have started the whole computer over again, but it had been sitting there and it came up, so I decided to try. So, we got here. It's asking for 14.16 and we're at 13.87. We are getting boost, but as you hear, it has an obvious boost leak. So I'm going to have to look into that. It says the oil level is a little bit low, but it is still cool, so we'll see what we get. I'm going to back out of here, out of the common rail, and let's look at instrument cluster has a fault, it says, right? Now, according to the instrument cluster, it says the SRS light's faulty, stored, fuel level sensor stored with a short to ground, CAN communication faulty with engine control, brake, and transmission control. All these are showing stored, so they're not active. So what I will do is I will erase them, and we'll see if anything comes back up, which can involve turning off the ignition and turning it back on. We don't need to restart it right now, so I'm not going to mess with that. I'm going to back up out of the instrument cluster. Immobilizer had no fault. Airbag. We'll see what we got going on there. It says it's got a minor fault. It's probably going to be a CAN bus based off a voltage situation. Here, fault codes and events. Under voltage at terminal 15. Wow, look at that. I called it voltage. So we'll erase that. So switch back to off. for 5 seconds for the airbag module. It was 1 second for the instrument cluster, and it's 6 seconds for the CDI module. Now, electronic transmission control, it's showing it's got an informational fault. That's probably going to be a CAN bus error in the past, stored. Here, fault codes and events. No CAN message stored. Engine temp implausible stored. A couple wheel speed sensors are stored, and none from air conditioning push button control stored. So this means they were probably working on the vehicle with the battery connected. We're going to erase all these. This one's going to be also a 1 second reset. Come back up. ESP system. Now, if you notice, there's ESP showing on this, but not an ABS system. If you are using an iCarSoft MB2 or the Autel APs, it will show you both the systems. If you have a 2500 model, you have the ESP module. If you have a 3500, you have the ABS module. You can't access them from the wrong side. It's the same module, it's just different programming language. So this here, for the ESP, it shows the unknown fault code. Let's see, wheel speed right front axle implausible, pressure sensor, signal of pressure sensor is implausible, and CAN communication engine control module faulty. So I'm going to kill these. Everything is stored, once again. So none of these are active codes. So it's going to ask me to switch off again for 1 second, switch back on. And go back up. Electronic selector, it shows informational and minor fault. So go back in here. Once again, fault codes and events. CAN message from ABS is stored. CAN communication faulty, current is stored, but that's the 1926. If you get P1926, that one you pretty much can ignore, because I've seen just about every van I've ever come across has that somewhere in the system, and it's just weird. Dr. A has even said it's a ghost code, don't worry about it. Otherwise, we got CAN fault here, CAN fault there, stop, lamp, switch, brake, torque, implausible. So we'll just get rid of all these. Remember that only one that was current and stored, not just stored over here, was the ghost code that every Sprinter has. So switch off, 1 second, switch on, and we go back up. It says heating control has an error, a fault, minor fault. So we'll go here, fault codes and events. Compressor clutch has a short to ground. Blower stage 1 has a positive or negative short, and CAN communication to the engine control. All of them stored. And once again, they were working with the battery connected. We're going to kill all this, switch off, and switch on. Now the crazy part is, with these being stored, I'm going to start the engine now. Touch those together. It's going to give me that code, and I'm going to pop the hood. But first I'm going to turn on the air conditioning, because remember, the air conditioning was not working at all. Without even looking in the system, if it's got a code, a fault in the HDR control module, it may not activate compression. Now look down here, and compressor still is not active. So for the AC, I'm almost willing to bet that it has no pressure in the system. So we'll go here under actual values, under HDR heating control. Oop, went too far. Go air conditioning menu. Look at this, refrigerant pressure, 0.0 psi. So it's not shut off for emergency or acceleration. But it is off because the next one, 0.0 psi, is the pressure. There's no refrigerant in the system, so the aux fan is off. Pressure sensor is at 0.4 volts, which equates to 0 psi, and it says it's 54 degrees coming out of there, and that'd be most likely because it is 55 degrees outside. We have this unseasonably warm day in southern Minnesota. So once we get out of here, I'm going to double check. CAN bus is good. Now I'm going to go back up a level. I'm going to do another quick test. So I got to go out. Now say I am working with another vehicle, so it'll delete all the previous. And it thinks I'm looking at a new vehicle. Once again, chassis number and kilometer reading, but being North America, it says miles instead of kilometers. And we'll do another quick test and see what comes up. We will have a minor fault in the CDI. It's going to be the start command without the start command, a start attempt without start command. It's a rare one. You'll probably only see if you have a situation where this is being bypassed in the what manner it is. CDI, minor fault. Instrument cluster pass, immobilizer passes, airbag passes, electronic transmission control, it's working it right now, it passes. Trans selector has the informational, that's no big deal. ESP module passes. Heating control passes. Now all these other systems, the auxiliary heater, this does not have. That's the Eberspacher under the left headlight, under the battery pan, all that. And you got the heater booster. This one definitely does not have that. And does not have backup assist. It's just running through these modules and finding them and not finding them. And auxiliary heater, nope, does not have. And it's just going to continue on like this until it realizes there's no more modules to go through and all of them are done. Central locking. There is no central locking on this van. As I said, it's manual window, manual lock. And then it's going to ask, were there controls that were not recognized? But there were not. So the only fault we have right now is in the common rail system. So we'll communicate with that, and it's probably only going to be the one single code. Start attempt without starter actuation 2521-008 stored, because it's not actually active. So I'm going to take this step down the street a little bit and we'll see if we can't trigger any more codes. Alright, we have found our smoking gun. We got her up to about 70 miles an hour and then all of a sudden the pedal went dead and we were in obvious limp mode and it slowed back down to about 65. And we get a 2670-008 monitoring of the temperature sensors. So what does this mean? Well, obviously I wanted to go look and see what the values I'm getting, right? So we'll go down to actual values, my sensor overview, and I start looking at my temperatures. Intake air temperature 121. Boost air is only 78.4 degrees and then coolant temperature 175. That makes no sense. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hop on out here. I'm on a little dirt road I pulled off onto the side. Open up the hood. And we're going to look at that little bugger. See if it's even there or how it looks. This is where your boost temperature sensor comes from. This is your boost temperature. So what we got here is likely a bad sensor. Luckily I got a spare in the shop. And when I get a chance to get working on this thing again tomorrow, I will swap that out. We're gonna have to start a little mini series on this van too. But I believe I have enough footage for this. I will let you be with this amount of info and we'll call it a day. I've got to get going and do some other work with my day job. So until tomorrow, I shall see you then.